Do it again. Good morning. My name is Helen Foss, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you today as today's worship associate. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. Welcome to all of you who are present here in the sanctuary, and welcome to all of you who are joining us online this morning. Our COVID protocols continue to allow us to relax the mask mandate in the sanctuary today. And again, we will be gathering for fellowship time with refreshments following today's service in the parish hall in the back of the sanctuary. Everyone is invited to join us. And you'll notice there are a number of items out there from our church auction that you will be using the online strategy to do your bidding, but you can actually see the physical items that are available out in the parish hall today. So welcome to you all, no matter the hue of your skin or the origin of your ethnicity. Welcome whomever you love and wherever you are on your spiritual journey. You are welcome here. If you're new to First Unitarian, I invite you to check out our website, firstuuwilm.org, to learn more about us and to sign up for our email newsletter that will come to you every Friday in your inbox. This morning, Reverend Larry is inviting us to reflect back on the commemoration of the date, 2,520 some years ago, when the Buddha had his enlightenment, and what might be the connection to awakening and engagement with the problems in today's world. I'm looking forward to traveling along, to being challenged, and pondering with him. Now, let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers, and I want to add my welcome to Helen's welcome to you on this morning that is made warmer by your presence. You know, Helen and I and the choir and others get here to see what happens behind the scenes every Sunday. And I just want to take a moment to offer some gratitude to Helen and the other worship associates, to John Claney and our AV team, to Kathy Harris, our music director, and our choir, to Catherine Williamson, who is doing our program for children and youth, to our ushers, and I know I'm forgetting someone, but let's just take a moment to appreciate all the effort that is put into offering you the gift of this worship time together. So our reading this morning comes from a short book by Reverend James Ishmael Ford. It's entitled, "This Very Moment, A Brief Introduction to Buddhism and Zen for Unitarian Universalists." Reverend Ford, who I know, in addition to being a UU minister, is also a Zen Buddhist priest. He offers these words: "Any authentic spirituality helps us integrate the inner with the outer, the mind and the heart, Genuine spirituality is the reconciliation of the universal and the particular in this moment. It is a call to notice the smell of baking bread, the chirping of a sparrow. It's a call to know our very human thoughts and feelings as they rise and as they fall. And ultimately, this spirituality teaches us how to act on this planet.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me by lighting it now. As Reverend Larry lights our sanctuary chalice this morning, I will read these chalice lighting words from the Buddha. The collection of 423 verses uttered by Gautama Buddha, who we now know as the Buddha. He said, "Only through love can hatred come to an end. Never does hatred cease by hating in return. And only through love can hatred come to an end. Victory breeds hatred. The conquered dwell in sorrow and resentment. They who give up all thought of victory or defeat may be calm and live happily at peace. Let us overcome violence by gentleness. Let us overcome evil by good. Let us overcome the miserly by liberality. Let us overcome the liar by truth." Please remain seated now and join in singing this meditational hymn, number 1009, Meditation on Breathing. The words will be on the screen, but you'll also find them in the teal hymnal. Please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
On this Sunday, as Helen so carefully approaches the Advent wreath and lights 2 candles in our Advent wreath to honor the Christian season of Advent, may we open ourselves to the ever-present possibility of awakening within life. And may we commit ourselves to the ongoing cultivation of compassionate presence. Thank you, Helen. And now join me in a time of meditation, which this morning will also be a sung meditation based on the Buddhist loving kindness meditation. stay seated, and we'll begin singing our meditation filled with loving kindness. The words will appear on the screen. They'll also be found in the teal hymnal 1031, and we'll conclude with a time of shared silence. Each Sunday when we gather, we take a time in our service to attend to the concerns and the joys of our own heart. So let's take a moment now and attend to whatever it is that we may be holding in our heart. And so that none of us need to hold any concern alone. Invite anyone who wants to, either in our chat or in this room, to speak aloud your particular concern or particular joy that you're holding today. What are those concerns, first of all? Let's hear the concerns. What concerns might you have? What joys might you be holding today? Let's hear some of those joys. Other joys. Family. Yes. Yes. So we come together and bring our sorrows and our joys to one another. May all whose names were spoken and those unspoken find peace and healing this day. So may it be.
The reading this morning is from Engaged Buddhism by Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh's ideas about engaged Buddhism started taking shape when he was a peace activist during the Vietnam War. When bombs begin to fall on people, you cannot stay in the meditation hall all of the time, he said. When I was a novice in Vietnam, we young monks witnessed the suffering caused by the war. So we were very eager to practice Buddhism in such a way that we could bring it into society. That was not easy because the tradition does not directly offer engaged Buddhism. So we had to do it by ourselves. That was the birth of engaged Buddhism. In a nutshell, engaged Buddhism means connecting individual meditation practice to global ethics and social action. Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say, meditation means to be aware of what is happening in the present moment, to your body, to your feelings, to your environment. But if you see and if you don't do anything, where is your awareness? Then where would your enlightenment be? Your compassion.
Thanks, Helen. So a man asked a wise teacher, "What good is meditation? Can it make the sun rise?" And the wise teacher replied, "No. but it can keep you aware so that when the sun rises, you actually see it. As it turns out, really seeing does not come to us so easily. So many times we see what we want to see. Psychologists call that a pre-confirmation bias. So often we don't even notice the wonders of life and of nature that are all around us. We tend to take what is wonder-filled for granted and as just ordinary. My friend and mindfulness teacher, Rabbi Sheila Peltz Weinberg, who I invited to speak to us in the spring, was the founding core teacher of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. When her students, which include now hundreds of Jewish leaders, wanted to pay tribute to her, they put together a collection of reflections in a book that honored her teaching and the impact her teaching had on them. And they entitled the collection, Good Noticing. Indeed, this simple phrase, for me, is one of the primary aims of mindfulness meditation, good noticing. To be awake enough to notice seems simple, but it's also very profound. The other concurrent aim of meditation is to be engaged, intentionally engaged with the world around us. So often we think of only the mechanics of meditation and not these overall aims of meditative practice. We tend to focus on the effort required in observing and returning to our breath, sitting in some particular posture, being still or calming our monkey mind. We confuse the means with the ends. However, to quote the Buddha, the raft is not the shore. The finger pointing to the moon is not the moon itself. Perhaps this Zen Buddhist story identifies a common state that will help us to really understand the opposite of the meditative state. The story is a horse is galloping quickly. It appears that the man on the horse is going somewhere very important. And another person standing along the road shouts, "Where are you going?" And the man on the horse replies, "I don't know. Ask the horse." Indeed, what Thich Nhat Hanh calls our habit energy often pulls us along like a horse that we often seem powerless, unaware, and driven. Today, the aims of meditation to be awake and to be engaged are my focus. On December 8th, as Helen has mentioned, it's celebrated as Bodhi Day. It commemorates the time when Siddartha Gautama, who became to be known as the Buddha, had his own awakening experience. It might help us to know that the Buddha struggled for 6 years and studied with various teachers until one day he decided to simply sit under a tree until he would awaken. The account is this account in one of his discourses gives you some idea of that ordeal under the tree. And I quote, "I thought, why didn't I grit my teeth, press my tongue against my palate, and use my mind to repress my mind? Then, as a wrestler might take hold of the head or the shoulders of someone weaker than he, and in order to restrain and coerce that person, he has to hold him down constantly without letting go for a moment. So I gritted my teeth, pressed my tongue against my palate, and used my mind to suppress my mind. And as I did this, I was bathed with sweat." I was not able to tame my mind. Perhaps his ordeal seems a little familiar to any of us who have tried meditation practice. Let's do a quick poll. Grit your teeth. Press your tongue against your palate. Use your mind to repress your mind. Sweat. All of the above, says a few of you. So the Buddha discovered that he could not be awakened through his own willfulness, but through a gradual, unfolding willingness. Willfulness, willingness. A theme that we've heard about recently. So that was a review. Once he did awaken, the Buddha spent 49 more days under the tree, enjoying his realization and the peace that rose in him. I like to think of that time as his time to marinate a little in the experience. When he finally got up to join the others, he shared with them this insight. Dear friends, I've seen deeply that nothing can be by itself alone, that everything has to interbe with everything else. I have seen that all beings are endowed with the nature of awakening. At the heart of the Buddha awakening, indeed, seems to be this understanding of interbeing. The more contemporary Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, who you'll hear a lot about today, seems to have coined the word interbeing to express our deep interconnection with everything else. He writes, to be is always to interbe. If we combine the prefix inter with the verb be, we have a new verb, interbe. To interbe, and the action of interbeing reflects reality more accurately. We inter-are with one another and with all life. Now, my challenge for you this week is to try to use the word interbe in a sentence with someone this week. See what happens. For those of you who might find that this sounds just a little too esoteric for you, or woo-woo, as we say in the business, Thich Nhat Hanh draws upon this example from the biologist Lewis Thomas. He describes how our human bodies are shared, rented, and occupied by countless other tiny organisms, without whom we couldn't move a muscle, drum a finger, or think a thought. Our body is a community. And the trillions of non-human cells in our body are even more numerous than the human cells. Without them, we could not be here in this moment. Without them, we wouldn't be able to think, to feel, or to speak. There are, he says, no solitary beings. The whole planet is one giant, living, breathing cell with all of its working parts linked in symbiosis. To awake to such a perspective resonates with the wisdom of science and with perennial wisdom. It shows how our awakening cannot actually be separated from our engagement, our deeper engagement with the world. Our contrary contemporary doctrine of individualism can lead to some of this harmony and the destruction that underlies our climate emergency, not to mention many other social ills. In some religious tradition, there seems to be this tension between being awakened and ongoing spiritual growth and engagement with the world's concerns. However, in Unitarian Universalism, this is often expressed in some artificial dichotomy that we sometimes engage in when we make a distinction between our efforts around spirituality and our efforts around social action. Although we might claim for ourselves one proclivity more than another, such a dichotomy belies our actual history and our heritage as Unitarian and Universalists. Certainly within the sources of our living tradition as Unitarian Universalists, we draw upon, and I quote, direct experiences of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. And we also draw upon words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Ours is a religious tradition that can actually incorporate this both and complexity of being awakened to our spiritual development and also to be engaged in the ongoing work of social transformation, social justice. We challenge ourselves to both. Our transcendentalist ancestors, who, by the way, were some of the first in this country to explore the scriptures from the so-called East Asian religions, did not abide by such a dichotomy. Their spiritual practices for transcendence were the impetus of their significant engagement in the world. They were involved in the abolitionist movement, women's suffrage, educational reform, social and economic community experiments, and the reform of the church. And vice versa. Their engagement in all of those causes led them to deeper practices of spiritual growth and development. Likewise, as Unitarian Universalists, when we live up to our potentials as individuals, as a congregation, and as a religious movement, in my opinion, we do not take a lopsided approach of either or. We take an emphasis in both our spiritual growth and our social transformation as an interconnected practice. Make sense to you? Awakened is one of the themes in our sermon today. Does it make sense to you? Thank you. Okay. So, the awakened side reminds us of our commitment to ongoing spiritual growth. Since spiritual can, however, mean so many things in today's world, one can't help to be a little suspicious of that word. So perhaps you've heard this joke. A Buddhist monk walks up to a hot dog vendor and says, "Make me one with everything." The hot dog vendor hands over the sausage and the bun with all the trimmings, and the Buddhist monk hands over a $20 bill. The vendor pockets it. The Buddhist asks, "Where's my change?" And the vendor replies, "Change must come from within." Sure, we have to be discerning when it comes to our spiritual growth and our spiritual practices. Robert Wright is one of those discerning persons who decided to take on a mindfulness meditation practice. Wright, who has taught at Princeton University and at Union Theological School in the area of science and religion, describes his journey in his book, Why Buddhism is True, the Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment. Now, first of all, let's clarify that he's not arguing for the beliefs of Buddhism, like reincarnation. Instead, and I quote from an interview with him, he focuses on Buddhism's diagnosis of the human condition. The part that is relevant to the here and now, it's Buddhism's take on our suffering, our anxiety, and our general dis-ease that Wright wants to explore, because that is where he sees its perspective lining up with scientific fields like evolutionary psychology and neurobiology. Drawing from this perspective of evolutionary psychology, Wright points out that our human predicament is that we are, by our very nature, often seeking good feelings and avoiding bad feelings. He points out that Buddhism diagnosed this as a kind of problem and remarkably came up with a technique, mainly mindfulness meditation, that allows us to actually disempower those levers to no longer respond to the fundamental incentive structure of trying to avoid painful feelings or try to always seek the thing that promises to be gratifying. That, he says, is an amazing thing. And the amazing thing is, in his experience, it works. In other words, rather than being driven from ourselves by our habits or emotions like that man on the horse in the Zen story, we can learn to recognize these habits or emotions and work with them to alleviate their hold on us and thus the suffering that often comes from such a dynamic. Thich Nhat Hanh outlines these steps that cultivate our awareness in a way that our ingrained way of dealing with our experiences, particularly our emotions, does not often do. He outlines these steps. This will be in the exam, so I'll go over them slowly. First, recognize the emotion. So if we're angry, we might say to ourselves, I know that anger is in me. This we might know first in very, very subtle ways. A tightening of the jaw, a racing of our heart, an abruptness in our responses, long before we ever label it anger. And then approach it with acceptance. Rather than deny the anger, we accept that it's present. This can lead to the third step, an embracing of our anger, a being with it rather than acting it out or avoiding it. Thich Nhat Hanh uses the metaphor of holding our anger in our two arms like a mother holding her crying baby. Our mindfulness embraces our emotion, and this alone can calm our anger and ourselves. Once we have recognized, accepted, and embraced our experience of anger as an example, then we can look deeply because we're calm enough to come to understand what brought this anger about. This, in the best of circumstances, can often lead to some new insight. As Thich Nhat Hanh says, the fruit of looking deeply is understanding the many causes and conditions, primary and secondary, that have brought about our anger. They're causing our baby to cry. Are we hungry? Was our anger triggered when someone spoke to us meanly? Was our anger triggered when we were reminded of something not in the present moment, but of something from the past? Do we come to understand that our friend who might have spoken to us meanly is not at his best because his father is very ill and possibly dying? It's here that Thich Nhat Hanh is able to make a bridge from the personal awakening to how we engage socially. How do we engage with our world? He writes, these practices of stopping, of calming, and resting for new insight and new understanding are the preconditions of healing. If we cannot stop the course of our destruction, we'll just continue. The world needs healing. Individuals need healing. Communities and nations need healing. So, as you might recall from the reading that Helen offered us this morning, Engaged Buddhism was shaped by young Vietnamese monks during the war in Vietnam. They felt compelled to take the fruits of their meditative practice off the meditation cushion and into the world. In fact, he was part of the Vietnamese Buddhist Peace Fellowship that sat at the parish peace talks. As stated in the reading, meditation means to be aware of what is happening in the present moment, to your bodies, to your body, to your feelings, to our environment. But if you see it and you don't do anything, where is your awareness? Then where would your enlightenment be? Where would your compassion be? One of Thich Nhat Hanh's last books before his passing in January of this year was Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet. In the book, he provides some of the perspectives and practices for a deep ecology that includes personal transformation as well as social transformation. He writes, when you wake up and you see that the earth is not just the environment, the earth is us, you touch the nature of interbeing. And at that moment, you can have real communication with the earth. We have to wake up together, he writes. Then we have a chance. Our way of living our life and planning our future has led us to this situation that we're in. And now we need to look deeply to find our way out, not only as individuals, but as a collection, a collective, a species. At the time that we understand that just being awakened to our interbeing, our connection to all it is not enough. At a time when we are being awakened to understand that the interrelationship between our emotions, our thoughts, our body, and the subtle energies within and between us is not enough. Engaged Buddhism comes to understand it's not only when you're engaged in social action, but as Thich Nhat Hanh asserts, engaged Buddhism takes place anytime, whether you are walking, sitting, or drinking your tea in mindfulness. That is also engaged Buddhism because you are doing it not only for yourself. You are doing it to preserve yourself in order to help the world. He advises us to look for the signs of a lopsided approach and what it can often bring about. He writes, we may encounter people who are very active but are not operating from compassion. They are tired. When compassion is weak, it's not possible to be happy. You become easily jealous, frustrated, and angry. We have to know our living. You cannot do more than you can do, or you will burn out. I'm going to read that one more time. There's a message in here for me, just a moment. I think I might be able to find it. You cannot do more than you could do, or you will burn out. We have to organize our life to ensure balance. Working with a community, we receive the collective energy of support. This morning, I want to encourage us to tend to our collective energy in this congregation. If indeed interbeing defines who we are, then it defines who we are in this moment as well. Certainly, we do not want those who are engaged in the work of this congregation and the work of this congregation in the broader world to burn out, do we? We do not want to set up a lopsided dynamic where some of us are here for spiritual growth to be awakened, and others are here for engagement, doing things. For those of you who tend to be overengaged or overcommitted, let me talk to you for a moment. I want you to rest in your chair. I want you to feel the support of your chair that's holding you. And imagine for just a moment that that sensation of being held represents the support and the appreciation of this congregation, this present congregation, and all of our ancestors who have led us to this moment. Take a moment and feel that support. Many of us receive from what this congregation has to offer. Take a moment to feel your gratitude. Maybe either imaginatively or actually, put your hands in a folded way at your heart to express your gratitude to all of those present or even in past generations of this congregation whom we've inherited from their devotion to what we are and have become. Whisper to yourself whatever gratitude you may feel. Take a moment. Let's take a moment to recognize our actual interbeing with one another and how caring for one another means also caring for our collective energy so that no one needs to feel overburdened or overextended. Let's share the burden more broadly whenever we can. Let's say yes to our care for sustaining this congregation's capacity more often. Let's say no when we know we are overextended and trust that others will step up to say yes when you have to say no. And finally, let's take a moment to feel our connection with the earth, that essential connection. If we cannot balance the care in this community, our own interconnectedness, how can we truly care for the earth that continues to support us and hold us? For the earth is our common breath, our common body. Amen.
Ever since I read Reverend Larry's sermon description, I've been thinking about how on our first trip to India, we visited Sarnath, a city near Varanasi. It seems appropriate during this stewardship moment to share a few of those memories and this small window into Buddhism for Robert and me. There in the 6th century BC, the Buddha was known to have preached his first sermon under the tree, teaching his disciples about suffering and a way to escape it. We joined Buddhist pilgrims with their prayer wheels, walking under the pipal tree, the grand descendant of the original tree. And then we read the huge plaques on which translations of the Buddha's first sermon were engraved in multiple languages. There were silk scarves hanging along the wall of the temple, thrown up by pilgrims to mark their passing through. We learned that Buddhism really developed 300 years later in the 3rd century BC, when King Ashoka embraced it and made it the state religion. There was a huge flow of conversions from the low caste to Buddhism. The Hindu priests feared the loss of control and proclaimed Buddha to be the 9th incarnation of Vishnu, thus incorporating it into Hinduism. Adjacent to the temple today is a 2,200-year-old stupa and the ruins of a monastery started by the Emperor Ashoka that once held 400 monks. Afghan raiders destroyed it in 1192 and burned all the monks. It was lost until 1798, when the king of Varanasi noticed 2 stupas in the jungle, and British archaeologists' excavations in 1836, a hole was drilled into an untouched stupa. There, they discovered a stone with writing on it that declared it was the site of the Lord Buddha's first sermon. Nearby, the Sarnath Museum houses some of the greatest treasures of Indian Buddhist art. So much history, so much wisdom, so much we can learn. And I am so grateful for my Unitarian Universalist faith promoting a window into this wisdom and connecting it to our lives today, as Reverend Larry has. This is the time in our service when we ask you to support the ongoing work of this church, the resources to pay our staff to lead our programs, to keep our lights on, and the heat going now that we're entering winter. If you're here in the sanctuary, please put cash or check in the cash box at the rear of the sanctuary after the service. The other ways to contribute will be shown on your screen during the offertory music. All contributions will be gratefully received. And now let us dedicate these offerings. Please join me in this dedication to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives and these our offerings.
There is always a light when we are ready to see it. There is always a light when we are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night, to climb this hill. Together we will. There is always a light in the dark. We are ready to see yes. There is always a light in the dark. We are ready to see yes. To see the light, let your be the light, Lord. Raise our eyes in the dark and to the light is it. Together we will. There is always a light. There is always a dawn. We are ready to see it. There is always a light. Dawn. We are ready to see it. To see the light, let your be the light. Raise our eyes in the dark night and to the bright together we will. There is always a light. There is always a dawn. We are ready to see it. There is always a light. There is always a dawn. We are ready to see the light, let your be the light. Raise our eyes in the dark night and be a guidance here. Together we will. There is always light in the darkness. There is always shine darkness. Be the light.
If you have lit a chalice at home, I invite you to extinguish it as Reverend Larry extinguishes our sanctuary's chalice as I read these words. If God is your strength and companion and prayer, the means of centering your thoughts, there is room for you here. If the teachings of the Buddha give you clarity and calm in the midst of human suffering and striving, there is room for you here. If Gala's seasonal rhythms lead you best through the myriad steps of life's great dance, there is room for you here. If the still, mysterious capacity and power of the mind stirs your imagination and quickens your pulse, there is room for you here. Rest now beside that spring, wherever it is for you, and let your attention go to the small places inside or out in the great wide world. Places or people in need of healing or for which your heart is filled with thanksgiving. And in that spirit, let us go forth from this sanctuary and ponder these thoughts.
Following the closing hymn, after the benediction, I invite you to greet those around you and to join us in the parish hall. There's lots of excitement in the parish hall today. There's an auction going on, beautiful quilts and paintings and all kinds of baskets and all kinds of things. It's almost like Christmas has arrived already. There also, or Hanukkah, or whatever, it's here. Also, I'll be, those who want to, we have a Soul Conversations on the first Sunday of the month in the Warner Room with me, and we'll focus on the theme of the Soul Matters groups this month. My spouse calls it Rap with the Rev. I call it Rap with You. So we are entering a whole month of activities, of different services and concerts and various other events. You can find a flyer in the back. This flyer is meant for you, but it's also meant as an easy way to invite a friend to join you for any of these events, so that you can really be in that spirit of giving and give some of your friends and neighbors an experience of First Unitarian Church as well. So the benediction. Hearing the bell, I'm able to let go of all afflictions. My heart is calm. My sorrows ended. I'm no longer bound to anything. I learn to listen to my suffering and the suffering of the other person. When understanding is born in me, compassion is also born. It's from the Plum Village community. So stand as you're willing or able in body or spirit, and let's sing together hymn 312.